down the line by Grant Robertson, the Labour Party MP, who has been heavily involved in chasing the Judith Collins scandal right from Orovita right through. Grant Robertson, thank you for joining us. What is your take on developments today?
Well, you know, this is too little too late in some ways in terms of Judith Collins. There's been many opportunities for John Key to have let her go. Obviously, what's been revealed in this email is extremely serious. It does show a culture of the kind of politics that's grown up under John Key's leadership. Cameron Slater's someone that's close to him. He's acknowledged that in the past, obviously close to Judith Collins as well. And what we've seen today is one further stage, and I think what we need to find out a lot more about, which is what else has gone on under this kind of politics.
Grant Robertson, what did you make of the Prime Minister's explanation there in terms of how this email, this latest email, has come to light? It seems to have come straight to his Chief of Staff, is that correct?
Yeah, well, that's what it sounded like. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing. Obviously, John Key's had a lot to say about the way that Nicky Hager's book was put together. What I wasn't clear about was whether the anonymous source was truly anonymous, or actually that John Key knows exactly who this person was. He's just keeping their name anonymous. Whatever, there are a lot more questions to answer here. And I think actually what this shows is that John Key now needs to come down off his high horse about Nicky Hager's book and actually look at each of the allegations and information that is in that book and go through them, and so the New Zealand public can get some assurance that he isn't endorsing this culture of politics, because at the moment that's what we see. It emanated from his office with Jason Eade, from Cameron Slater, who he has close links to. Just getting Judith Collins to resign doesn't resolve the other issues that have been raised here.
Yeah, because that's one of the issues here. I mean, the political analysis always was that John Key didn't want to act against Judith Collins, or Jason Eade for that matter, because he didn't want to give any credibility to what was in Nicky Hager's book. Now suddenly, when it suits John Key, he's happy to rely on an email taken from whale oil to essentially push Judith Collins out the door. Does this sort of show that his whole defence that Nicky Hager's book is just a conspiracy theory is essentially collapsing, Grant Robertson?
Oh, well, it's completely collapsed. I mean, Nicky Hager provided a series of emails that amount to evidence of a culture of dirty politics under John Key's leadership. He now has to face up to the fact that all of those emails, all of that evidence now needs to be looked at properly. It's very convenient for him to suddenly get rid of Judith Collins when the heat comes on him in an election campaign. But this is actually about John Key and his moral leadership. He has let this culture of politics grow under his watch, through his office and through a senior minister. Throwing Judith Collins onto the bus will not stop the need to get to the bottom of this, and in fact to get rid of this kind of politics from New Zealand.
Grant, I want to ask you this. I mean, a key point in this seems to be, has John Key come across this email through sources of his own, or has he come across it through the hacker sending it directly? Of course, if it has been through sources other than the hacker, if it is a leak on Judith Collins, perhaps from within the centre-right itself, it goes to show that John Key might be using this as an excuse. That's what Winston Peters was alleging, that John Key has used this as an excuse to get rid of Judith Collins. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's something from the hacker, or do you think this is the National Party essentially finding a way from within its own people to get Collins out the door?
Well, it certainly is an excuse he was looking for to get rid of her. I mean, there were many other occasions on which he could have sacked her. But yeah, it does look that way, that someone inside the National Party may have finally had enough here. Clearly, there are a number of characters involved in that email who are close to the National Party, and it's that orchestration of a campaign against someone with the minister right in the middle of it and the Prime Minister's pet blogger right in the middle of it that makes us realise just how deep this culture goes. So it does appear as if this has come directly to the Prime Minister's office as part of trying to find a way of getting rid of Judith Collins. That just makes it all the more murky for John Key 3 weeks out from an election.
Yeah, but let's look at the substantive part of the allegations as well, the substantive part of what's come up in this email, because it is essentially a whole new ministerial scandal involving Judith Collins. Grant Robertson, she was alleged there to be in on, or at least involved in, or at least aware of some sort of campaign against Adam Fairley, who was the director of the Serious Fraud Office, reporting directly to her as the minister responsible for the Serious Fraud Office. Have you ever heard of anything like this, a minister essentially being involved or knowing of some sort of campaign against her own chief executive?
Well, it's an extraordinary situation and very, very serious. I mean, the kind of information and power that you have as a minister is unique. And Judith Collins has been shown, it would appear here in this email, to have abused that. But let's be honest, she's been doing that in a number of situations. There's also the Privacy Commission is now investigating a similar possibility of abuse of power around ACC. And we know that when she leaked the information about Simon Pleasance, the public servant who was involved in working for the Department of Internal Affairs, that was also an abuse of power. And that's the problem here. It's a culture of politics where the Prime Minister and the Minister of Justice feel that information they get because of their jobs, they can then use in a political or a personal attack. That is just plain wrong. And actually, sadly, there's a pattern of behaviour from Judith Collins here. This is certainly an extreme example, but it's one of many.
Yeah, and that pattern is what? People that she doesn't like, she's able to engage the bloggers to help her work against. Is that the kind of pattern that you're talking about there?
Absolutely. I mean, that's quite clear from Nikki Hager's book, that this is the kind of politics that Judith Collins thinks is okay, to use information and power that she has as a minister against, in this case of Simon Pleasance, an innocent person, in the case of Adam Feely, a senior public servant. That is outrageous, it's wrong, and this is what's grown up under John Key's watch. There is a lot more to dig into here. John Key can't hope that by getting rid of Judith Collins 3 weeks out from the election, he solved this. This is a cultural problem in John Key's government.
Yeah, and there seemed to be some confusion there in John Key's explanation of this. I mean, on the one hand, he was saying he wants an investigation into what's happened with these latest emails and that it was serious enough on its own for her to resign. And then on the other hand, he was saying, well, she won't be back after the election. She won't be back sometime after the election. She's essentially going to the back benches by the sounds of things, which goes to show that he really does deem whatever's happened as really serious. On one hand, he's sort of indicating that he wants to see what the investigation has, and then next minute, Grant Robertson, he is absolutely saying she will not be back in cabinet for a long, long time. What do you make of that?
Well, I think he's trying to hedge his bets because he knows that Judith Collins isn't going to react well to being pushed back. She should have resigned or should have been sacked many times over the last little while, and she hasn't done that. John Key is now trying to hedge his bets a bit, but the reality is anyone reading that email, or in fact reading any of the emails in Nikki Hager's book, you would realise that this was the behaviour of someone who should not be a minister. John Key has clung on to her until today, but I think throwing her under the bus today is not going to be enough to deal with the evidence that's mounted against her.
Yeah, and it really does raise the question, doesn't it, about why he didn't act against her earlier. I mean, he's taken this allegation and the sort of technical aspects of it to do with a minister and a minister's relationship with the chief executive, but Grant Robertson, why did the Prime Minister not find at some point earlier some reason to do this? Why did he wait so long? And do you think he was driven by those polls, including the 3 News Read research poll that showed about 2/3 of New Zealanders wanted her gone?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt that New Zealanders, now that they've had exposed to them the kind of politics that's gone on under John Key's watch, have got serious questions about whether they want his government to carry on. He's been forced into this today, but that doesn't solve the fact that there's numerous other situations and a lot of other evidence that counts against both Judith Collins but also his own office and the work that he's been doing. I think he knew he had to do something today, but the question a lot of people will be asking was, where was John Key's moral compass during the Orovida affair? Where was John Key's moral compass when Nikki Hager's book first came out and we got information that Judith Collins had leaked on an innocent public servant to try to create a diversion? John Key has effectively endorsed that behaviour. Today he's found an excuse to get rid of Judith Collins, but that does not take away from what's happened over the last months.
And what do you think, just looking at the wider picture, I mean, Judith Collins' leadership ambitions at the start of this year, a real likelihood, obviously, likely contender for the leadership of the National Party after John Key. What do you think now? What do you think of those chances now, Grant Robertson?
Well, if the National Party decided to elect someone like Judith Collins, who's prepared to go out of her way to try and demean people, to undermine public servants, that would raise serious questions about what kind of government that National Party would be. I would have thought it would be Stephen Joyce who would be very pleased with developments today.
You think it's Stephen Joyce or maybe Paula Bennett, anyone obviously but the Judith Collins camp. Do you think there has been more going on as well? Just looking at, if I could get your take on the Winston Peters allegations, the earlier ones, that Judith Collins had been disloyal, that there had been an approach to Winston Peters saying, if you can't work with John Key, could you work with her? Do you think that perhaps those allegations of disloyalty raised by Winston Peters himself, obviously denied by Collins and Key, do you think that they may have played some part in this as well?
Well, look, I don't have any information or evidence about those particular claims, but it's quite clear there's been a cumulative effect here. You know, Judith Collins' behaviour around Aurovita, what the other information that's come out in this book, eventually the Prime Minister knew he couldn't cling on to her here. But I do think that he has to answer some questions himself now. Diverting all the attention onto Judith Collins takes away from really one of the critical players in all of this, Jason Eade, who was a senior advisor in John Key's office throughout the period that he was giving information to Cameron Slater to be part of political smears. So I think John Key might hope that by making Judith Collins resign today, that he somehow or other deals with those issues. He doesn't. In fact, he still has many, many questions to answer, and by not taking responsibility for this, he's effectively condoning this kind of politics.
Yeah, and so many questions, as you say there, and so much talk now about different kinds of inquiries. A number have already been launched. John Key talking there about another kind of inquiry. In the Labour Party's view, what shape now should an inquiry take? What form should this inquiry be?
Well, look, it has to get to the bottom of the overall culture of politics under John Key's watch. What role have people in his office been playing in giving out information that they only have because they're connected to the Prime Minister? What was the one issue that the Prime Minister was, he said today, talking to Cameron Slater about? I'd be fascinated to know that. I suspect he's had a lot more conversations than just that. He needs to answer questions about that. And I think at the end of, at the bottom of all of this is the fact that we have a Prime Minister who told New Zealanders he keeps a list of things in his top drawer about other politicians. Well, is that the kind of Prime Minister we want? Someone who's focused on the dirty politics, or someone who's actually focused on what they can do for New Zealand? It seems to me the inquiry needs to be about the overall culture of the relationship between ministers and John Key and his government and the public service, and how that information gets out.
Okay, thank you, Grant Robertson, Senior Labour MP. Now,